And that process is hard when you're a child, and what
It's
you're going
impossible.
through it's impossible. When you're going through that much grief as a child and no one recognizes it, why would anyone have a reason to give you comfort? And also, why would anyone ever think that you would need validation for what you're going through as a child? I remember those years of being separated from my parents, and part of the Filipino culture, and this is why I never considered myself completely just Filipino or Filipino American, because I think a lot of us can relate to that experience of we're not just another immigrant, in this country. Part of what made it hard for me in the Filipino culture, and like you, Ruth, I'm not blaming a culture or demonizing a culture, but we have that habit, maybe in many Asian American cultures or Asian cultures, of saving face and saying, stop the crying, we're here, and not harshly, but it's part of the culture, stop the crying, and just move on, sort of, and be happy, and I know Aaron's laughing, but if you translate it, the double language is minimizing, using double words in the Filipino language is minimizing what you're doing. So, sangit, in Ilocano, it's crying, and stop that. And it's very, very hard, and that's what I'm hoping today, that this interview would also reach the ears of those counselors and anyone working with children who might not recognize that they're working with third culture kids. And Ruth, I want to dig into a few sections in the book that I believe a lot of us can relate to, and give you a chance to comment on those. What a lot of people don't realize outside the non-TCK or CCK community, and for those just tuning in, third culture and cross-cultural kid community, is the first day of school for those with global lifestyles looks very different from someone who's dropping off their kid at the kindergarten for their first day of school, where for someone who goes to a local kindergarten, and it is very hard. I know it's a parent experience, a human experience that we all can relate to. But for those with global lifestyle, there's an added layer to that. And let me just read what Ruth wrote as part of her first day of school, if I'm understanding correctly, Ruth.
Right.
It says here, this is the very first chapter. September 1951. Dear Mom and Dad, I feel awful. Something inside is squeezing me so bad I can hardly breathe. You said it would be fun to get on the plane and go to boarding school, but so far it isn't. I couldn't stop crying on the airplane, but I didn't want the other kids to know. I kept my face to the window so they might think I liked watching the clouds. And that was part of your first day, part of your introduction to that boarding school. And then, jumping to college years, September 1963. Dear Mom and Dad, here I am at college. How did I get to be so old? It's nice here in the dorm, but I can't believe how homesick most of the freshmen are. They run to call their parents every other night, and they all talk about how much they miss home. It seems so silly. But once in a while I wonder what is stranger, to be all of 18 and still missing Mom and Dad, or to be only 18 and not feeling homesick at all. So that was college years. And then now we go to the loss of your grandmother. April 1967. I love Grandma so much after living with her these last 7 years. Couldn't she at least have seen me married? The finality of her going is still incomprehensible. I feel a lot like I did the day you first left me for 4 years. And then July 1967, you're talking about your husband here. I can't believe God will let me keep David. It's like he's dangling Dave on a rope, letting him come closer and closer. I'm afraid that at the last moment, when I reach out my hand to take him, the string will be jerked back, and God will laugh. Ruth, what would you like to share about those sections?
Well, I have to get past emotion here. It's funny how things last for a long time, isn't it? And I really appreciate how you put that together. I haven't thought about it in cohesion like that for a long time. But see, that's what I'm talking about, how life and experiences affect you. And you have to understand, in all those years, I had no language, okay? So all I'm wondering is what's going on. So as I was mentioning before, we do wind up detaching from emotion because we don't really have a choice if the emotion is too bad. In fact, Doug Ota's writing a book on transition, and he's talking about, if we talked about grief in terms of attachment and loss in those ways, maybe it would be a more acceptable term. But obviously, one of the huge issues, I know most TCKs don't go to boarding school at 6 anymore, but a lot in my generation did, so they're still part of the story. But when you have a chronic cycle of separation and loss going on, what happens is eventually you learn how to cut it off because it's too much. And this is where we have these huge issues, I think, later on with relationships. And that was what happened to me. First, I'm mad at my roommate. I said, hey, what's your problem? You know, don't be such a baby. Well, what am I saying? I've pushed away the reality that it's actually okay to like your family and to need them. I hadn't seen my parents for 4 years, so I mean, why would I miss them? It was, even in fact, when I wrote letters, I never realized it was the death of my family when they left for 4 years until I was 39. And I cried as if I'd gotten a car, response. I mean, I noticed that they just all been killed in a car accident. But then if you move forward, okay, so then my grandma's replaying something because I've been with her. Now I'm going to lose her again. So the reality that I never, ever get to keep, well, in a way that's a reality for everybody because that's life. But we do it chronically. And so how do you live in a relationship? And I think one of the things that was, didn't have language. I could not understand when I got married to this wonderful man who loved me and was very good to me. Every time we really got close, I'd fuss about something. I'd fuss about the garbage. I mean, like, hello. And it was like, I was terrified. I wanted to be close, but like 95%. Because if I got all the way close, I couldn't bear it if he was gone. And so, again, that's why it's important to name your losses, because then I have to make choices. Am I going to lose my whole life with this person by fear? Or am I going to live as best I can and as well as I can, and when the loss comes, to live with that? My father, as you mentioned earlier, was another adult TCK who had no language before he died. He died without ever knowing that. But you see, he was the one that said to me, Ruth, unpack your bag and plant your trees, because when you start to live in all these places, you're never going to live if every place you go you don't unpack your bags mentally and physically, and you live there, and when the time comes to move, then you move. They said plant fruit trees, and he planted fruit trees. And when I went back to Africa, I went back and I saw the trees. He said somebody else will eat from them if you don't, but don't be afraid to plant. Don't be afraid to live. And so, I think that was when I got married. It was that fear that if I really invest everything, I've been married 46 years here, and I'm working on, daring to hope it will last, but really, that's again why understanding we can make choices. So that was the thread, that this place of preparing to protect against pain was robbing me in my life of other wonderful relationships because of fear. And I think that that's not uncommon. And so we can be independent and be proud of that, and it's a good thing, but then we isolate sometimes from other people. And I have to tell you, I've met a lot of TCKs that I feel like I can tap around them, but I can't get in because they've gotten so protected against pain and loss. And if you're one of them, I want to tell you there's a better way to live, and that's engaging and living fully and daring to be in these relationships that are given to us, and you'll feel a lot better, even if they get lost, if you've lived in them fully, than if you've not lived in them halfway, because there's other parts of my book. Oh, I just heard a recent song by John Denver about saying goodbye, and he says, why do I always get mad before we say goodbye or something? And I thought that, he's a TCK too, that once I realized that, because when you're getting mad to protect, well, before my parents left, I was just terrible for before they left for 4 years. Then they get on the plane and you feel absolutely awful because you have no way to make it up then. And so I think that's another huge thing for me, is learning the patterns I had of isolating and realizing I could make a choice. Part of being a person is being able to make choices, and we are not victims, and we can make choices as adults and so forth. Does that help?
That's beautiful. And I remember when you were on Dr. Bethel's interview, you quoted a song sung by Garth Brooks. I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the writer of the song now. But
The Dance.
The Dance. And that song also played a special part in my heart, because like what you mentioned, it does talk about taking the risks. And I think that's also why we vibe so well with that TED Talk by Brene Brown on vulnerability and the power of vulnerability. And I know some of the TCKs out there listening have already heard that talk, but it goes along that same message that go ahead and live your life as if you're going to get hurt, knowing you're going to get hurt. Because if you don't live, then you miss out on so much. Michael, do you have anything to add?
Go ahead, Ruth. Well, I was just thinking, somebody gave me a poster once, and it said, a ship is safe, but that's not what ships were made for. I want to bear witness that as I have made these choices, been able to look at these things, it was painful at the time, but honestly, the life I've been able to enjoy and live from that has just been beyond mind-boggling. And I was in Afghanistan 2 years ago doing something, and I don't know, there were a whole lot of things happening, and it was the middle of the night, and I just thought, you know what, I was born to do this. I think the people that I live around in Indianapolis will think this is crazy, but everything in me was made to do this because of my life, because of my birth, because of how I was made, and it's just been a fabulous life that I wouldn't have missed, but I could have missed it if I tried to stay safe.
And
So
Michael,
Mara, what's your question?
Did you have anything to add?
I think, as Ruth was sharing about this, the process of grief and care. One thing that stood out to me is kind of where we are now in our learning process, and is that and how my dad might respond to it. And again, later I'll have more time to go into it. Just briefly, I think that there are lots of people who think my dad actually was a sociologist. Dave actually has his doctorate from Houghton College. Is given a doctor of pedagogy, but mostly he was a practitioner, and his base for that was a pastor. And I think it's that pastor's heart, that compassion that led to the listening and to be able to, as Ruth said, to take people's stories and to synthesize them and to find the connections. And there are three things that he emphasized about the care of TCKs. Like, why should we invest? Why should we care? And I wanted to have time to hit those just really fast.
Sure.
One, the main one, he says, because we exist, because there's a group of people with a kind of a common experience and challenges within that and potential within that, and so just the fact that we're here means, and I think Ruth alluded to this too, about because there are corporations and the military complex and and missions and sending families over. Well, we are creating TCKs, and so in that sense, then to be human is to care for them. I'll throw out a quick number I just saw. There are currently over 3 million students in international schools around the globe, and that number is growing exponentially. It's a huge. We're talking about a pretty huge people group, and that doesn't count all the people who've come through international schools or homeschooled, etc. So it's a large group. The second thing, the second thing that my dad wrote, I picked this up in a couple of writings, and that he would say was that to act on behalf of another human being for their good and to demonstrate what God is like is true love, and he believed that was our universal calling. That's the second important reason. It's really out of love that we care for people, to act on behalf of them for their good. And the third was this idea of, with those challenges, that we step alongside with care and comfort. I love that word, Ruth. It's maybe got me rethinking a couple of things I've been writing recently. But that alongside that encouragement and comfort that come together is the recognition of potential. That and we've mentioned this earlier, and so I won't spend a lot of time there. But Frederick Buechner, I love his quote about the places of the world's great need. Calling is where our deep gladness and the world's hunger, meet in the world's deep need. And I do believe we're in a time when people with, I would say, cross-cultural capital is what I would call it, and there's that compassion, that empathy, that understanding, that openness, that learner's attitude, server and the learner. It's what our times need. It's what our global community needs, and I believe there's terrific potential there. So I think that to begin with our own story, and to then to move from there with that message of healing, with that message of love and power, is one that's is what we're given. It's maybe what Ruth referred to as step 2.
Wow. And for us, that is what we hope to do. All of us are here today, and not just us, the 4 of us here, but our live audience tuning in, trying to be patient through any technical difficulties they may be facing, and just, being here, gathered together, and whether they tune in live or afterwards. And it's really because of the work of your father, Michael, and we wouldn't all be here if it wasn't for him. And I just want to relay my thanks for you and your lives and the gifts that you do share with us, because really there wouldn't be any motion, there wouldn't be any progress if we all just sort of looked out for ourselves or stayed in our own process of in our own journeys without sharing it with the world. And that's why I want to encourage anyone out there also listening and watching to share your story also. And in a little while, we're going to be looking through any additional questions or comments that people who just joined in, maybe on TCKid.com, or maybe they have been on watching us live from our Facebook fan page. But before we do that, we do have some announcements, and it is that we will be starting TCKid Connect, which we described earlier, a platform where TCKs can come on and find opportunities to apply their skills as a result of being able to know themselves and understand themselves better, and therefore being able to fine-tune their skills better. And also this TCKid Talks interview series is actually part of a long series that we hope to continue with your support, and we will be inviting people who TCKs and CCKs who are in leadership positions, those who have something to share that is very educational and informative, including researchers, authors, and lecturers. And we'll also be inviting artists, including musicians, performance artists, and also We will be inviting and asking stories from people who were involved in some way in a historical event, whether the world knows it or not.